Okay. All right. So I would just like to say that today we have two eminent New Jersey archaeologists. We have two eminent New Jersey archaeologists with us who will talk to you about two of Hopewell Valley's historic farm families. Michael Gall is a principal senior archaeologist at Richard Grubb and Associates. And they are a cultural resource management firm in Cranbury, New Jersey. Michael also serves on the board of the Archaeological Society of New Jersey, otherwise known as the ASNJ. Also, we have Dr. Richard Hunter. He is president of Hunter Research, and that is a historic preservation consulting firm. The company provides historical, archaeological, and architectural services to a wide range of clients. Richard is a long-time resident of Hopewell Township. He currently serves as the Mercer County Cultural and Heritage Commissioner, and he is a past president of the Hopewell Valley Historical Society. Mr. Gall's talk will be on the Moore Family Farmstead in Hopewell. That archaeological work was undertaken in advance of construction for the Capitol Health Medical Center in Hopewell, and it revealed important clues about the mid-18th century Moore family. Their story is told through the archaeology of their former farmstead and the artifacts the family left behind. Dr. Hunter's talk will trace the Phillips family of Pleasant Valley, especially as it relates to Howell Living History Farm. Over the course of the 18th and 19th centuries, the Phillips farmed, milled, and smithed in the valley. The house of blacksmith John Phillips no longer exists, but the house of his farmer grist miller's son Henry still exists on the grounds of the farm. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Michael Gall.
How are you all? Thanks for having me. If anybody can't hear me, just raise your hand so I can see, and I'll try and speak louder and enunciate. So the title of the paper is Archaeology of New England Migration to New Jersey's Delaware Valley, the Moore Family Farmstead. It's also the Hart Family Farmstead, so it's both families. Houses, big or small, wood or brick, ugly or cute, McMansion or cabin. They are one of the largest artifacts archaeologists can study, beyond landscapes and townscapes. They tell us a lot about the people who built them and lived in them, their daily lives, their understanding of the use of space, and their behaviors. From the material used to the method of construction, to their location and size, internal layout, and furnishings, housing provides important clues about the constantly changing ways people use and communicate cultural and architectural trends. This is true of the Moore and Hart families' former houses that stood in Hopewell not far from Scotch Road and I-295. The remains of the houses, buried below the surface, were found prior to construction of the Capitol Health Hospital. And here you can see the location of our project site outlined in black. Apologize for the fuzzy slide. And the site that I'm going to be talking about is right here in the corner. In the 1930s, the Moore family left Long Island, New York, for Hopewell, not far from where we stand today. Archaeological excavations revealed that the Moore family constructed their New Jersey home in a New England center chimney style. Excavations at the site also revealed the importance of non-masonry foundation building methods, also known as earth-fast construction. So that's post and ground building, sill on grade, or sill and trench construction. It is likely that additional similar sites also exist in Hopewell based on the township's early settlement history. Settlement in Hopewell by European colonizers began in the early 18th century after Daniel Cox of England acquired land encompassing the township in 1688. Initial settlers acquired their land from settlers other than Cox, who also claimed title to the land, leading to conflicting land claims that forced Cox to eject 50 landholders in 1731. A brief period of violence and instability ensued over the next 20 years. Those who settled during the unstable period, like the Moore family from Newton, Long Island, may have been hesitant to construct durable housing on stone or masonry foundations, which also required additional outlay of expenses for fear of losing their home, for fear of losing their land to Cox. Stability resumed when landowners began repurchasing their tracts directly from the Cox family to ensure title to their land. The oldest surviving permanent and durable houses in Hopewell date to this later period. The Moore House was either erected by Nathaniel Moore shortly after 1731, though it's probably unlikely that it was Nathaniel, or more likely by his son John and daughter-in-law Keziah, soon after their marriage in 1734. John and Keziah resided on the property with their son Amos, their daughter Elizabeth, as well as an enslaved man named London and two enslaved women named Peg and Dina. In the 1740s, John was a municipal tax assessor and a freeholder. A 1768 probate inventory reveals that the Moore house had a back room in the northwest portion of the dwelling, a kitchen, a chamber, and most importantly, a cellar. And this aspect of the probate inventory reveals some of the archaeological information and the time sequence in terms of building construction on the site. Amos received the farmstead after his father's 1768 death and resided there with his wife Anne, daughter Rebecca, and at least 5 enslaved laborers until 1814. The property passed to Aaron Hart Sr. after Rebecca's death in 1826, who retained the farmstead until 1880. The farmstead was later raised in the 1960s, and here's what you can see of what remained by that point. It was basically just a house and some outbuildings to the back end of the house. Most of our archaeology that was conducted was in the front yard area, as well as exposing the full foundation, for the house. In 2009 and 2010, Richard Grubb and Associates completed archaeological surveys for the former farmstead and identified the location of the family home or homes. By that, recovering 17,000 artifacts, we learned that there had been that we had the remains of not one but 2 houses, one dating from the 1730s to the 1750s, and the other from the 1750s to the 1960s. I just want to point out, so our excavations, and let me give you some spatial locations. So this is I-295 here. The hospital is back in this corner. This is a large retention basin. And when we first began the excavations, it was on a grid pattern. So we excavated about post hole size test pits across the entire of the limited disturbance. Once we identified the site, we excavated 5-foot square units, which are basically this size here, to get an idea of the integrity of the site. And once
where's Scotch Road? I'm sorry.
Scotch Road would be behind me if I'm standing.
Thank you. Sorry.
The intersection will be down in this area, right? And then we began using mechanical backhoe to remove the topsoil to expose cultural features. Once we got into the level excavations of the project. So both houses were very different dwellings. We also found a late 18th century milk house, 2 small outbuildings, which are possibly sheds, 2 wells, 3 pits, and several dozen post holes. So the excavations at the site revolved around the exposure and full excavation of the second dwelling, which you can see here, which sat on a masonry foundation. We also exposed via backhoe several pits that were found in the southern portion of the site, as well as a milk house here, a well, the remains of an earlier house. And you can see how small this house is in relation to this larger house. This is about 4 times bigger than this house. And then the 2 outbuildings that we identified were here, one of which overlaps with the first house. Here's a view of the milk house and well. So the well was situated right next to the milk house, so they could bring in water to a trough system inside the building, which ran this way, in order to cool the dairy products that were inside. Oddly, though, the ridge line for the building runs east-west. It's kind of unexpected because with a milk house, you'd expect it to run north-south, so it has less southern exposure, thereby heating the house up, heating the building up more. But this one for whatever reason, they decided to build it with the roof ridge line going east-west. So it did have full southern exposure. Some of the pits identified, you can see an archaeologist excavating. You can see how artifact rich these pits are on the ground surface and in the profile of the pit. And it's surrounded by a series of post holes where the post either decayed in place or had been removed. There's a partially excavated pit. The bedrock at the site in the southern portion of the site is extremely high. It's only about 2 feet below ground surface. And here's what the site looked like. So it doesn't look like much, but we actually found a lot of data from it. So you can see a lot of the post holes in the front view of the image, and you can see the Capitol Health building being constructed in the back. So we're basically on a little island with construction going on around us. And here's a view of what the house probably looked like. The second is much higher. I just tried to squeeze it into the view that I had, and the roof peak would have been at a more acute angle as well. But that's what we think the house would have looked like based on the configuration of the posts that we identified. So the artifacts found revealed the site was first occupied by John Moore in the 1730s. There, John had a small post and ground earth fast built in the southern portion of the site. Let me go back. As a worker and a cooper, as a barrel maker, John Moore was well versed in the qualities offered by durable, decay-resistant woods, which may provide one reason for his decision not to use a masonry foundation. John's occupation was also represented by the remains of 2 small post and ground outbuildings, a small refuse pit, and a scatter of artifacts. By the 1750s or the 1760s, the initial house was raised or moved, and a larger house with a stone foundation and a cellar was built. Here you can see that stone foundation. We excavated 100 feet interior of the building. It was filled with basically material that was deposited in there in the 1960s. So we had, like furnace remains, all sorts of modern material. But it importantly gave us the ability to determine the internal configuration and then compare it to nearby houses like the Woolsey House in Pennington. The first dwelling was marked by a series of 8 post holes ground into shell. So in the upper left image, you can expose the shell bedrock, and then there's 2 overlapping stains. And the southern portion of, the lower portion of the slide, you see those stains have been excavated, the soils have been removed, and that's basically what happens. The vacant void of 2 post holes that once occupied that location. Within the holes, load-bearing posts were placed that extended to the roofs, to the dwelling's roof point. The technique, known as earth-fast or post and ground construction, has post-medieval English building antecedents. In America, such buildings have been primarily found in the Southeast and the Chesapeake regions. The Moore House is among the first post and ground dwelling found in New Jersey. We have since identified several dozen, but this is one of the first that has been identified during the 20th century, the 21st century. Since then, several such buildings have been found. Earth-fast construction methods were often employed by people residing in an unstable society where few incentives existed to invest in permanent structures, and few individuals lived to old age. The use of earth-fast building methods negated hiring a stone or brick mason, the expense of acquiring or mining stone, materials from water like sand, lime, oysters or clam shellfish, as well as mining and acquiring clay. To make brick, for instance, landowners had to acquire clay and temper, purchase materials to make mortar, and put the brick maker and his staff up into a residence, usually an inn or a leased dwelling, while he and his staff kneaded the clay, formed them into shape, let them air dry, built a brick clamp to fire the brick, all before the brick could even be laid. So it was a huge monetary expense to just even build with brick or even stone. Masonry foundations and houses required a significant financial outlay. To substitute for brick and chimneys, house wrights often took liberties to make chimneys of wood and clay. To obviate this cost, landowners resorted to tried and true old world building methods. In early New Jersey, it appears that various forces were at play that incentivized the use of earth-fast construction methods. The goal was to utilize capital gains to purchase more land, build a more permanent subsequent home when funds permitted, and establish a dynasty by bequeathing the estate in whole to an heir through primogeniture inheritance, that is, to the firstborn son, or more common among those coming here from New England, to multiple heirs via partible inheritance. The building practice was used for constructing houses, outbuildings, and commercial structures. Wealthy, middling, and poor individuals all used earth-fast architecture, as did pioneers to third-generation settlers. The continued construction of earth-fast buildings to offset construction costs remained within Carpenter's architectural lexicon and in contractors' interests as late as the mid-1760s. For house construction, as well as into the late 19th century for outbuildings in New Jersey. Often tenant houses continued to be built using post and ground or sill on grade methods well into the early 19th century. Maintenance of impermanent buildings was also not without expense, though. Carpenters were still necessary. Construction of John Moore's house may have been aided by the use of enslaved laborers to offset construction costs. Neighbors may have also offered help in exchange for goods or services. After construction, rotted and damaged timbers required replacement. Rotted posts could be sistered with prick posts, and damaged, interrupted, or uninterrupted sills had to be made anew. This effort required skill and social network. We also cannot ignore the influence of New England migrants to New Jersey during the late 17th and early 18th century. Landscape studies clearly indicate that New England-style towns developed as township corporations in 17th century Woodbridge, Piscataway, Middletown, Shrewsbury, Newark, and Elizabeth during the late 17th century as a result of this migration. Social, religious, and political customs were also carried to the region. So too were vernacular housing styles and trends. The replication of New England housing styles is evident in John Moore's first house. This home was marked by 8, and here you can see the configuration of the house footprint. You see the 4 corners, an internal summer beam support, and then these 2 buildings, well, at least this one postdates the first house. And it's unclear when building 1 was constructed. This home was marked by 8 post hole stains that outlined the building, measuring about 15 feet by 21 feet in plan. There were 3 posts along the north and south walls, a central prick post in the east and west walls, and a number of internal posts. The house was positioned on the only portion of the site that contained shallow bedrock, which was used to provide a stable platform to rest the load-bearing posts. No post molds, that is the stains left by the decayed posts themselves, were found, suggesting that the timbers were removed when the house was raised or dismantled, possibly for reuse in the construction of the second dwelling in the central portion of the site. So building material reuse was super common during the 18th century. There's no Lowe's and Home Depot to go to. You had to reuse what you can, and this is probably what happened here. The uneven nature of the post holes, the post hole base elevation suggests that the vertical posts in 3 H bents, the central, southern, and northern, were cut to different lengths and propped into place to form a level roof plate. So you can see similar H bents in this building, here, in the back wall. And these would have been raised into place individually, and then the walls, the exterior walls would have been placed and tied into them. The post holes dug to different elevations were also observed at the late 19th century shelter shed in Staffordshire, England, built between 1874 and 1882. Unlike the traditional transverse assembly, whereby the structural bents run lengthwise along the short sides of the building, so like what we have here, and the long walls are formed by tying those bents together via an overhead plate. The early earth-fast dwelling erected by John Moore appears to have utilized longitudinal construction methods. And in this method, the long exterior walls are erected and connected via tie beams. A similar technique was found at the Garrett Voorhees blacksmith shop site from the late 18th century, which is in Franklin Township, Somerset County. So we did excavations for the Amwell Road project. It was a widening project in Franklin. And just right next to the road, we had the remains of a blacksmith shop site. Similar construction. It was all post and ground building methods. And based on the configuration and the shape of the post holes, we were able to figure out how those H-bents were erected. And in this case, these long edges were erected first, and then the internal tie plates were installed. John Moore's first house appeared to represent a side chimney plant or center cell commonly found in New England and Long Island. This style home may have been familiar to the Moore family, who previously resided on Long Island. It was also similar to the pre-1700s Thomas Osborne House in Wainscote and the circa 1700 Hoffman House in Amagansett, Suffolk County. Our house was probably similar to this gray shaded section of the house. And here it was probably very similar to this section of this house without the salt box section. John Moore's first dwelling may have contained a by 15-foot eastern room. A large hearth was tucked away in the northwest corner of the dwelling and occupied a 7.5-foot by 9-foot area. A front entry measured 7 feet by 9 feet long and contained a narrow winding staircase to a second story or garret. And this is just based on the post configuration and then comparison of these to Hab's drawings of buildings that are of the similar period on Long Island. Though small and cramped by standards of today, a 15-foot by 21-foot house was not uncommon of a size at the time. In 1798, based on the direct tax, the average size homes in central New Jersey measured roughly 18 feet by 24 feet in size, so just slightly bigger. So we're talking about a fairly small building. The Moore family's second house was 4 times larger, and here's the configuration of this house based on the foundation remains. And it looks almost exactly like the Woolsey house in Pennington, with the exception of this section. In the Woolsey house, there's actually another fireplace here, and in the early or second generation Moore house, there's no fireplace. It's just a cupboard and a winding staircase. So this house faced south to maximize southern exposure and measured roughly 30.5 feet by 43 feet in plan. It was also the only building, the only domestic building erected on a stone foundation on the site. The new house contained 4 rooms on the first floor, including a kitchen, hall, parlor, and possibly a chamber, providing more living space than a formal plan and likely enabled separation between the Moore family and its enslaved workforce. It's also possible that the enslaved workforce may have resided in a barn or an outbuilding, which was also very common in New Jersey. The construction of the second home may have coincided with the Township that took place during the mid-18th century, following the end to land riots, which were more common in the eastern part of the state. It was similar to the 1765 Woolsey House in Pennington. It provided greater space for more purchased goods and served to mark the family status. And here you can see the foundation configuration for the Woolsey House. It's almost identical to the Moore second house. Deposits associated with John Moore contained about 12,200 artifacts, including 1 colorless drinking glass, 3 olive green case bottles, and a minimum of 31 ceramic vessels. Nearly half of the ceramics found are redwares, composed of utilitarian vessels like pans, bowls, pots, and dishes, which were likely produced locally, probably in the Philadelphia region. One of those dishes sgraffito or incised decoration, which is actually on the next slide. I'll just jump to that here so you can see it. You can see it in this area. A lot of the ceramics that we found were really small, so apologize for not having, really nice whole vessels that already can see that are picturesque. But this is kind of par for the course when we're excavating farmstead sites, and we're looking at kind of sheet min deposits or surface deposits that have been trapped over a long time. The high number of dishes suggests the family heavily relied on baking puddings and pies for their family meals. The low number of glass vessels relative to ceramics is also characteristic of contemporary rural sites in New Jersey. At the time, it may suggest preference for locally made ciders and spirits that were stored and shipped in wooden casks and barrels, rather than consumption of imported wines that were shipped in bottles. So we see this a lot, particularly in central New Jersey, in the Monmouth County region. Unlike the style of his home, John's artifact assemblage did not appear to shed additional light on the transfer of non-architectural customs from New England to New Jersey. Instead, the artifact assemblage from the 1730s to the 1768 period reflects contemporary trends seen elsewhere in central New Jersey. So we may ask, why is there this dichotomy between building traditions versus consumer behavior? We don't know, but perhaps the dwelling was built for John and not by John. Did John and his wife selectively adopt central New Jersey customs, consumer behaviors while living more overtly in a New England style home in their first home? Among the artifacts found, which of these are associated with the enslaved laborers? I mean, surely there have to be artifacts associated with the enslaved laborers. And in New Jersey, we typically have deposits that we refer to as plural. So they're kind of mixed deposits that reflect different people of different status. And we're not always able to identify those discrepancies except for in liminal places. And this often happens in standing buildings where you find caches of artifacts below floorboards, on the first floor or on the second floor, or artifacts that are hidden behind walls, which was actually fairly common, particularly on early Euro-American sites. Like there'll be shoes hidden behind buildings or walls, particularly near chimney stacks. And this had to do with religious practices and superstitions at the time. And we think that maybe, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it, but this is a piece of redware and we have one mantle here. So it's possible that it may have been an enslaved laborer's piece of ceramic that they chose to sort of get more out of than would have normally been the case. So these redwares are kind of like the Tupperware of the day. They're fairly inexpensive. You wouldn't really put a menthol in a piece of your Tupperware, but if you have the inability to acquire additional funds when you're already enslaved, you may resort to mending your ceramic vessels to prolong the longevity of their lifespan. Undoubtedly, Hopewell and nearby communities have additional sites dating from the early to mid 18th century that may help shed greater light on similar questions and provide more nuanced understandings of the cultural practices and customs of the day. In closing, I'd like to thank Phil Hayden, Sean Braden, Adrian Jareski, Mike Ansetta, Dave Strohmeyer, Jess Booking, Jerry Sharpenberger, and Brenda Springstead for their work on the project. I also want to thank Capital Health System for funding the archaeological research, as well as all of you for inviting me to do this presentation. So thank you.
I just go straight into this? To get out of this one, get into the other. You want to get into. Okay. No. Okay. If you can get that rid of that, that would be good. Okay.
Start the slideshow.
Okay. Do any of you want to move that way? I kind of have to stand here to be able to operate. It's hard to see the screen. Just now's a good time to.
It is. Oh, the Zoom.
Sorry.
There you go.
Okay.
I can just go.
Yeah, sorry. That's all right.
No, but Bob doesn't want to introduce me again. I don't know what's the matter with him.
I figured everyone remembered what I said.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks for coming out, everybody. It's a great thing to do on a rainy day. Come and listen to me. So, all right. Doug, is that okay? Am I? Okay. So this is a little different archaeology to what Mike's just been talking about, actually. He was doing large-scale excavation in advance of a development project that you all know, the Capital Health Hospital out there on Scotch Road. That was the basis for his work. What I'm going to be talking about is much smaller scale, not done for the development reasons, really. It was done for the county and Howell Farm here to try and provide information for interpretation purposes for the visiting public. So to try and sort of explain what's going on in Pleasant Valley in terms of its history from the standpoint of what's left archaeologically. So that's the sort of underlying basis for the work. So it was a lot more leisurely. It wasn't quite so hectic as I'm sure you guys were trying to beat the bulldozers, which is what he and I do for a living most days. The other piece of this that's kind of interesting is that there's a component of it that falls under the category of public archaeology, which is kind of that area of archaeology where you try and involve the general public and particularly school kids and try and increase awareness of history through archaeology. So it's a little different to what Mike's talking about, as we'll see. So I have been, and our firm has been working in Pleasant Valley on the archaeology for about 20 years now. We started out not doing any digging, but doing a strategic plan for Howell Farm back in 2002. And then that was updated in 2016. And then on the sort of digging side of things, we started in around 2007 and have been doing archaeology on and off since then. So let me just talk to the slide here for a moment and see if I can figure out how to work this. What do I do with that? It's what?
You're looking for the pointer?
Yeah.
The bottom.
Oh, this thing. Okay. Right. You're gonna have to. That one. Okay. All right. My little red dot. Everyone see that? Okay. So let's just get oriented first. So this is the 1849 Otley and Kiley map, wall map, giant wall map of Mercer County that you probably know. And here's Pleasant Valley written nicely. So we're dealing with a valley that is the valley of Moore's Creek that we know as Moore's Creek, also Smith's Creek, historically sometimes. Baldpate is down in here. And the valley is right in the northwestern corner of the township, and it goes over the county border, across a bit of Hunterton, and then back into Hopewell, just north of Harberton. So Harberton's up here. So that's the creek and the Baldpate to the south, and then the roads are just worth talking about for a moment. Pleasant Valley Road is this road, and it comes on down to the Delaware here, D for Delaware. This is Valley Road, and so there's an intersection here. This is kind of the heart of the valley, and that's where we're going to be dealing with for the most part. We are right now about here, just around about that. Pleasant Valley Road, which actually used to come split off from 579, come up here over Canoe Mountain up to this point, which is Honey Hollow, and come along Pleasant Valley Road from here. This you get down to Pleasant Valley, and then you go up Valley Road. That is the old river road, and that has been in existence for a long, long time, since at least 1700. And that sort of dominates the sort of movement in the landscape. The piece of Pleasant Valley Road that comes down here is also 18th century, certainly early 18th century, and it comes down to where the quarry is at the end of Baldpate. And there used to be an estate right here, the Lower Belmont estate of the Cox family, and it's right on the edge of where the quarry is today. So those are the kind of principal landmarks here. Just get into the Phillips family for a moment. This is a really feeble attempt at kind of a sort of broken limb from a family tree. And please, all ladies in the audience, excuse me for picking out the men's names here. And although John Phillips, who we're going to start with up here, had 7 daughters, I've actually listed his 5 sons here. So it's horribly sexist, I'm sorry. So the Phillips family, John, who's the one that initially moves into Pleasant Valley, he was born in Maidenhead, that's Lawrenceville, and his family originated before Lawrenceville. They came from Long Island, like the Moores did, from Newtown, Long Island, and before that, supposedly from New England, and then before that, somewhere in England. The early genealogy of the Phillips family is really complicated. Joe, I don't know if you may be able to help with that, but
I can't figure it out.
pretty obscure, to say the least. So John was one of at least a dozen kids. He was the son of Theophilus Phillips of Maidenhead. Moved into the valley in the mid-1730s after marrying a Dutch girl, Annette G. Lot. One of the sons was named Lot over here, and they had 6 kids, 4 sons, and I beg your pardon. They had 5 sons and 7 daughters, and here's the 5 sons. Peter, the eldest, he lived on the side of Baldpate. John Jr., who lived right here at Howell Farm. Major Henry, who lived in the house we'll be showing you a picture of in a moment, of that one, both that and the Howell Farm house. Joseph, who died young, and the youngest kid, Lot, who died during the Revolution, but probably not as a result of the war, but died in the 1779. I've kept going with Major Henry here because his family stays in the valley, and they're very prominently involved with most of the properties that we're talking about here. He died in 1805, and his property was split among his 4 sons and 2 daughters. And Henry ended up with a Howell farm here. Ralph moved just a little way out of the valley into Amwell, up Valley Road there, up Woodlands Lane. John H., he for the most part stayed with the mill property, and William, he moved into the house that Henry, his father, lived in on Pleasant Valley Road. So it's just, in terms of houses survived today, connected with the Phillips family. This is the Howell farmhouse. So uncertain exactly when that was built, late 18th century probably. John Jr. is the builder most likely, and then his son Henry. There's lots of Johns and Henrys. It's very, very. This house, which is on Pleasant Valley Road, you've probably been by it many, many times. Also known locally as the Byram House. The left side of this house is probably 1760s, and the right side is probably around 1800 and replaced an earlier wing on the same site. So that's that house. And then the third one is the least is known, is right on Valley Road, just down the street from here, referred to as the Phillips Sherman House. May actually only be an early 19th century house, but there's been claims made that it may be earlier than that, and it shows up on maps. So we'll look at that one as well. So these are the houses that we still have today. And we're going to just home in now and talk for a moment about the properties where we've actually done archaeological work out. There's 4 of them. This is the Howell farm right here. We've done a little bit of work there. There's this building right here, which annotated as BS. You all know what that means? Blacksmith shop. And then here, GM. Sure you have Grand Marnier. I don't know, whatever you want. That little building there, that's a grist mill. And then this is the Byram house, the Major Henry Phillips house, that's still standing. And you will note there is a building right here in 1849 that is not there anymore. So that's the 4 places where we've focused on it: Howell Farm, blacksmith shop, mill site, and this unidentified building right there.
Richard,
Yeah.
that's a schoolhouse. What does that say?
Schoolhouse. Yeah. Do you want me to go back? Actually, yeah, which is actually not the present schoolhouse site. It's slightly. Larry knows this site very well. He's somewhere in here, right? So that is a different site to where the schoolhouse presently is today.
And there were 2
right there.
grist mills so close to each other.
I'm sorry.
2 grist mills.
No, that's the grist mill.
To the left.
This is,
The GM to the,
oh, that is a different mill site that is out there.
But also-
Yeah, also a grist mill, and later a sawmill. So, and that's sort of downstream in the valley there. It's on county property, I believe, but nobody's ever actually gone looking for it. So it's not standing. Okay. So blacksmith shop, just very briefly, in 2007, we did some preliminary testing there on Valley Road as you go up to, out the gate here and up to Valley Road and make the left and start down to the creek. It's on this building here is a small garage, which is right here, which is the site of roughly the site of the blacksmith shop. So we did a grid of shovel tests, these little things here. And in the course of doing that, we're hitting foundations and producing lots of old iron related debris. So there is a blacksmith shop site there that has not been pursued any further, but it's a good candidate for doing something else. The Phillips, the John Jr. and Henry Phillips house, so that's the Howell farmhouse, which is the visitor center here that you go visit. Back in 2010, there was major restoration going on for the rear portion of the building, which was completely rebuilt. And archaeology was done in conjunction with that. And you're looking at test pits related to that. And here's the interior with the beams exposed. And we came back in 2013 and monitored the new construction. So that generated artifacts, little information about the layout of the house. And again, fairly minimal work that was done in connection with the county's restoration work. All right, so I'm going to spend most of the time talking about the mill site and the final house site. So moving on to the mill here. This is pinpointing the Phillips grist mill. So you saw we have maps that tell us roughly where it is, but we didn't know exactly where it was. So the excavation work focused primarily on the mill site itself, but there's a tremendous amount related to this mill site that's still out there in the landscape that you can actually see, and particularly from aerial views. And so this is a nice 1928 aerial photograph, which before there's much change in the landscape. Still looks quite a lot like this today, but we've got, this is the Major Henry Phillips property up here. So there's a house right there. The schoolhouse is right in here in 1928. And there's a cluster of buildings related to that. But the mill site is across the street and it's generally in this area here. But in the landscape, you have evidence of the mill ponds, a dam, a head race, and a tail race. You can still see traces of these in the landscape today. So that's, I think that's my dear wife standing in the head race, which is quite visible in the landscape there as a channel heading off into the woods, which perfect location for a trail. I think the intention is eventually to work this into the trail system for Howell Farm. And this is, doesn't look like much, but when you're out there, it's quite evident there's a dam across this particular branch of Moore's Creek. So you've got dams and raceways still visible today. This is the present, this is a fairly recent aerial photograph. This big swath here, you all will know what that is. That is the JCP&L power line, was to be the Penny gas. No longer, thank goodness. But the mill pond actually straddled that. And the head race, I was showing you views in here where the head race was. The dam is in here. And there's also a berm along here that we think supported a flume leading to where the mill site itself was, where the mill building was. So we started digging. The digging was done with the help of a backhoe. You really can't go look for sites like this just with the shovel and trowels and things. You have to get machinery, and you're digging quite substantial trenches when you're looking for particularly mill sites and industrial sites in general. So we dug a lot of trenches, as you can see, and we did eventually pinpoint the mill pretty well. And here's just one view looking across the remains of the mill building, which this is all backfilled now. It was covered over and protected and then backfilled. So the site is still there. You're looking at, this is the corner, one corner of the building. The main building is into the left here. And this little hole here, this is the wheel pit of the mill. So there would have been a vertical water wheel turning within this pit, fed by water dropping onto the wheel coming in from up in here. So there's fairly substantial traces of the grist mill still there below ground. And we were able to pretty much get the outline of the building. It was, I think it's about 30 by 20 feet. It's not that big. And here's the wheel pit down at the bottom. So the creek runs through here, and they tapped it and had a raceway coming in from here. And this is like a pier supporting the flume that would have brought the water into the wheel. And there's probably a overshot wheel, possibly a breast wheel. It's not possible to be absolutely certain about that. And here's the outline of the building. Pleasant Valley Road is very, very close to the edge of the building, right up in here. And then the tail race comes off down in here, comes out back into the creek. So what that building might have looked like, let's do it just to give you a better sense of this. This is a mill, the Dawless Mill, which is out near Ringo's. If you go down Route 31, down that long hill at the bottom, there's the old Rutgers Nursery house, which I think is that house. Off to your right there's a whole cluster of old buildings here, an old Amwell, and this is outside of that settlement. This is a grist mill that was still standing in the 1930s. This was recorded at that time by the Historic American Building Survey. So there's some really detailed information about this building. And in this particular case, the wheel would have been on this end of the building. The raceway is all completely gone. This end of the building, they would have had hoists from the top floor here to get the bags of grain in, and then they would be like vertically dropped down onto the millstones and processed and taken back out again. So this is probably what the mill here down the street in Pleasant Valley looked like, something very, very similar to this. It's nice to have a well-documented example nearby. Final point about this site. Mill sites, like houses, they change a lot over time, and you sometimes can see the changes in the landscape. In the case of this mill, we think that there was a early 18th century phase on the left here, which we've got the dam further downstream and a mill pond that is further downstream, and this flume coming off one end of it, and a waste gate over here, and the building is over here. So there's Pleasant Valley Road and Hunter Road, Valley Road's down there. So, and then that changed in some point, probably in the 19th century. And the goal here was to try and get the water level higher up, so you could get a greater fall, so you could get more power at the wheel pit. So they moved the dam further upstream, put in which encases a different mill pond. And here's the head race that you see today, back down in here. Now, we based this two-phase development of the site on some very, very vestigial traces of an earlier dam down in here, and the sort of topography that you see down in this part of the valley. So it's speculative, but it's not unlikely that this mill went through certainly developments as technology improved. They changed the whole mill system to show that, the water power system. All right, so the other site where we've done most of the work has been the John Phillips house site. So this is the original house location when John Phillips came into Pleasant Valley in the mid-1730s. We think this is the house that he built and lived in that we're trying to locate here. And it's that building that was on the 1849 map that was not identified. It was across from the mill. So this is directly across from the mill. So we're looking at Pleasant Valley Road is here, and it's under the trees in here. This is the driveway into the schoolhouse. Here's the big poultry barns behind the schoolhouse. More agricultural buildings. These are all 20th century buildings here. And the area that we're most focused on is right in here. So it's in front of the schoolhouse and the farm buildings, right up against the road, which is in here. So that's where we figured. So we did two phases of work. We did an initial very minimal excavation and some non-invasive radar work to try and get a better sense of what might be under the ground there. So what you're looking at here is a fellow with a ground penetrating radar system that it's kind of like a lawnmower, but you're not mowing the lawn, and you wheel these things up and down, and you're pumping radar into the ground and taking readings as to what the are as you go into the earth and recording that. And so this is the area that we looked at with the radar. And there's a piece here that we paid particular attention to, looked at in much greater detail, which is where there's a burial ground, and it's the Phillips family burial ground. And in the hope that we would see things that might help us know where to dig. So this map showing, here's the schoolhouse, this is the radar results here, this is the big poultry barn, this is the schoolhouse, this is the driveway. So these are the gray things, the things that you couldn't really obviously run the radar over or wouldn't want to. The burial ground is over here. I'll come back to that in a moment. So there are all kinds of what they call radar anomalies showing up in the radar survey here. And this area that we were most interested in, and there's a few things to point out. Number 3, we go up in here, you can't read this, it says circular anomaly, possible shaft. So that means it may be a well, it might be a privy, but it's something roughly circular that's dug down into the subsoil and is showing up as an anomaly. This number 4 is it says likely garden. So that's actually, if you go by there today, right now, there is a garden right there. So that's like a gardening area. We weren't sure what to make of it. Number 2 is not helpful really at all. This possible driveway, parking area, or walls. So that actually proved to be the area that we were most interested in when we actually did some shovel testing along with the radar. So just before I get to the shovel testing, this was the piece of the radar work that looked at the burial ground. So this is between the schoolhouse and Hunter Road. There's a couple of stones, I think, still there, but this gives you a sense of what are showing up as possible burial anomalies. So these are, you see the cuts for the graves in the soil.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah, sure.
That cemetery, there's just a tiny fraction of the number that were there. In terms of
Correct. So you're looking at we think there's about 90 to 100 burials in there. And some of the burial ground looks like it's been lost here from the road cut through. The road comes through here, so it's a very important burial ground. It has probably most of the early Phillips family members in it, and it needs to be taken good care of. You know, it's acknowledged in some way better than it presently is, I think. So, okay, so we've done our, and now we do our grids of shovel tests, which are incredibly boring most of the time, but you're digging little 18-inch holes with the shovel and seeing what's there, basically. I mean, that's what it is. So this was the grid we laid out. Here is the gristmill site down in here. Here's where we thought the house site should be. Here's the garden, and that circular anomaly is one of the shaft features. There's another one over here. That's more likely a well, we thought. And so we did our shovel testing, and just I do actually work sometimes. That's me 10 years ago. My goodness, I still.
is that you pulled out your back?
Probably. Yeah. One of the occupational hazards of being an archaeologist is back problems. They're just horrendous. Mike, just you wait. I spend a lot of time dealing with back problems. So there we go. Shovel testing. Whoops. Let's go back here. And we opened up one excavation unit, one sort of larger hole where we thought, based on the shovel testing and the radar, we thought we might actually find something. And we got lucky. We did our work properly here. We found ourselves a foundation which ultimately proved to be the western wall of a cellar hole. So on the left side of this is a filled-in cellar. On the right side is a much higher grade. So in this profile, you can see that very clearly. And we had some interesting artifacts come out of it. Probably the single most interesting thing is this very rusty looking coin on the top here. That was a William III copper halfpenny, dating from 1690s, early 1700s, one, something like that. So it's really like that, even though it was from a distilled context, had been churned up, and it wasn't in a primary sealed context, but it's good evidence that there's very early colonial activity on the site. So 2 years later, almost two, yeah, I think it was about 2 years, setting up a, my internet connection is unstable. This is going to be fun. We decided we would use this as an educational opportunity. So the County Park Commission, the Friends of Howell Farm, and with the help of a grant from the New Jersey Historical Commission, we mounted a 3-week field school for local high school kids and middle school kids. So sort of 13, 14 up to 17, 18, I guess, and a few adults, and used it as a teaching experience. And it was a lot of fun. I think went very well for Larry. I hope you would agree that it was a useful exercise, and we got some converts as a result, I think, including my son. So that's just an action shot. And here, believe it or not, here is Larry Kidder, who is a tremendous help. Larry, you just you do such wonderful things for school kids here, and I cannot thank you enough. You got so involved in this and were so helpful when we did it. And this is my son now, who's 22, who would absolutely kill me if he knew I was showing this. He's yeah, right. And here we have this. We had a lot of other kids as well. This is a partial group photo here, and of particular note, aside from Larry and Jim Lee, who is the person who in our firm really led this particular project. This person here with the bright red hair is our incoming president's eldest child. So Grace Warznak. So I hope she had a good time, Bob. I think she did. She did. Okay, good. And her mom. I'm sorry, Susan as well. Mom and dad are here. But she saw the light, right? So what we did with the field school was we opened up some units, as we call them. They're typically like these 5 by 5 foot units that Mike was talking about, different dimensions. You know, they're usually less than 10 foot. So this is a single unit here we're looking at, and we were able to come down on what's the corner of that same cellar, different corner. I forget which way we're looking at. We're looking, so this is the east wall here. So this is the southeast corner. And previously, 2 years earlier, we had the other side of the cellar. So there is a part of a cellar out there in front of the at the schoolhouse down in Pleasant Valley at the intersection. And if you, this is the same hole, and this was really just to show you the tip lines of the fill going down into the cellar. So you're looking at the interior of the cellar here, and outside these are actually natural soils back down in here, very shaly. So it's not very deep outside of the cellar. So most of the building is actually gone. You've got like a truncated cellar, so you're not seeing all of the foundations of the house. You're just seeing the cellar hole.
Richard,
Yeah,
sure. In the slide before this one and in this slide, the very straight line that you're seeing, is that stone?
Down in here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the inside face of the cellar wall.
And in the prior picture, they're remarkably straight.
Yeah, so, yeah. Isn't your cellar like that? No.
No.
My wife is not here today because she's moving toads from our cellar. So that's a, Mike, tell them that it's a perfectly bona fide cellar foundation.
I'm questioning that. I was impressed by how straight it is.
Okay. Okay, all right. So the kids that were working on this field school, they got to dig. They got to understand what they were finding as they were digging and interpreting the excavation as it was unfolding. They got to map things, and they got to retrieve artifacts in a way, and they got to identify artifacts. So all of the lovely things you do as an archaeologist, these kids got to do. And this is just what the drawings that you do on site eventually end up as is like formal drawings in a report that we produce for this. Actually, you can, if you're interested in the report, it's somewhere on our website. If you go to the Hunter Research website, you think you can find this particular report. But here's a whole corner unit that we were digging. Here's another piece of wall here to the rear of that. And here's the other side of the cellar. So the cellar is this rectangle there. It's actually very small, 14 or so by 12 feet. So interesting comparison to the sort of size early phase building you're dealing with there. So that's a site plan. And then this is like a profile drawing. So you actually draw the walls of the trenches that you're digging. And this one I just point out, this is the bottom of the cellar. So it's probably about 5 foot down from the ground surface. And here's the cellar wall here. So, you know, we've documented this. We know exactly where it is. And artifacts, one moment. So you had 17,000 artifacts you said you got from your site. We have just 3,000, a little bit of done on this house site. And here's a list of all the lovely things they are. It includes ridiculous stuff like bakelite. Right? Why we have to catalog bakelite, but we do. We very. But over on the right here, the category of artifact that one is usually most interested in is ceramics, and we have a nice mixture of ceramics and some early 18th century types or mid 18th century types, like creamware, and down in here Rhenish brown Rhenish ware, white salt glazed stoneware. So scratch blue stoneware, which is actually that's a piece of scratch blue. These are, like Mike was saying, you tend to find very small scrunched up bits of artifacts, particularly in the case of pottery. This is a piece of Delftware. So this is a piece of a milk pan. These are slate pencils, probably from the schoolhouse. This is I forget what that coin was, obviously a marble. And here, not to forget the Native American forebears, this is a full grooved Native American axe, sandstone axe that came out of one of the fill deposits in the cellar. So I mentioned that the Old River Road is a really old road. It quite possibly is an Indian trail, and it is an explanation for why you would be finding things like this. There's I'm sure, a lot of Native American artifacts all over Howell Farm, all over Pleasant Valley, waiting to be found. So final image here, just to summarize the John Phillips house site. The dark gray shaded rectangle is the cellar hole. We are projecting the house as roughly this shape here. The front of it is completely gone. The road has removed it. So we have you know, a good portion of the site missing. And we had traces of other walls over in this area in here. This is a perfect place for a privy back in here, this shaft feature that was showing up as a radar anomaly. And that could also be a privy or a well, this thing over here. Here's the gristmill. So it gives you a sense of how closely the house was, how close the house was to the gristmill. Gristmill dates probably from the 1750s. We think the house dates from the 1730s. The blacksmith shop probably dates also from the mid 18th century. So there's here like a lot of archaeology, and that's really the final point, we've just sort of scratched the surface trying to pinpoint where things are. But for the future, for the county, and I should add that the county has been extremely responsible in dealing with all of this. You know, one wants to go out and dig up the whole thing, but they do recognize that it's important to preserve these sites, and they do also recognize that they have an educational value, that if they're looked at in the right kind of way, you can involve the local community in investigating them further. So there's no question that you do more digging here and still leave a lot of it intact. And there is an educational opportunity that I hope the county will pursue in the future. So I think I probably touched on most of the people I wanted to thank, especially Larry, Bob, and the Howell Farm staff here. Pete Watson was obviously very, very supportive, very interested in this. We have actually designed some interpretive signs for some of these locations. The grist mill has a sign that is waiting to be installed, sitting in the barn somewhere, I believe, Larry. You need to lean on Pete to get those signs installed, because the archaeology of the Pleasant Valley extends the whole way up to Baldpate. There's a wonderful house foundation on the north face of Baldpate, which I'm sure many of you have seen if you go walking up there at all. But we did a sign for that, and it's just, when you're hiking these trails on Baldpate and around the farm, you need to know what you're looking at, and these signs help to do that. But Pete has a aversion to too many signs. It doesn't sort of quite fit with the farm experience to have too many signs. So I understand that, but when you're dealing with archaeological things that are bare, you need to have them explained to some degree at the surface level. So okay, I've gone on way too long, and you all want to go home. So sure.
Is that owned by the county property, or?
Yeah, it's county-owned property.
Well, it went out to-
Yeah, somebody lives in the schoolhouse, I believe, at the moment, and it's rented out. Yeah. Yes.
Comment on the old colored outline adjacent to the existing schoolhouse?
Yeah, actually, Larry, would you mind?
The schoolhouse was originally in 1889. One school, and that's got one room. It's the outline area at the bottom of
It's this here.
the built-in part of the illustration is the 1917. Bill ceased to be part of the school system in 1936, and then the house was sold in 1938 to two who wanted to build all the chicken houses. The current schoolhouse in this family noted the same. He needed the whole building for his family. He needed wood to build chicken houses. So he tore down half of the house, and it turned out it was the original house. However, I know people who visit that building, the material for that building is still there. It's just spread out. You can see that definite foundation.
Yeah, right.
When people are on the front porch of the present building, they're actually in the airspace of the original 1880.
Is the footprint of the original school building then, is that documented from archaeology or from just material photography, or how did you establish?
Yeah, well,
that?
partly what's visible at the ground surface, and partly from plans and photos.
The photographs from the time period of the school show the front where the driveway there's a concrete walk.
Back in here.
The wall right behind it, the measured out with the wall.
Yes.
And that's very visible in photographs. And also, there's two walkways that extend one to the girls' house, one to the boys' house.
Mhm.
Those paths.
Back in here, right. Yeah, houses were like here, right?
Well, one of them is,
We need to have them on this map.
between the cemetery and that, wall building.
Oh, in
And the
here?
other one is under part of the, building.
Okay. Larry has some wonderful books that he should be promoting here on Pleasant Valley, on the history of Pleasant Valley, and many other books too. But go Google books by Larry Kidder. Oh, okay, thank you. Right. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Richard, this is a question for both you and Michael, and I know here you found a coin, and this is an ancient road and possibly an Indian trail, but I'm wondering in either location, I think you mentioned 1731 as the operative date in both locations actually, which coincides with people buying from cars.
Right.
But then, of course, there are prior owners that may have been ejected. And I'm wondering if you found any solid evidence of actual European settlement on these two properties prior to 1730, because it's a late date. From the genealogical perspective.
No, not in this case.
Yeah, not here necessarily,
yeah.
down at the
Yeah,
other location.
No.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. And the Phillipses were not subject of ejectment suits. They had clear title.
Well, and they start out in Maidenhead.
Right.
Yeah.
So, right.
So they have the property down there.
Right.
So Pleasant Valley Road is owned by, is that county or state?
That's a township road.
Township road.
Township road, I think. Yes. Yes. Pleasant Valley Road is a township road. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's township road.
So next time they have to mill it to repave it,
Mhm.
do they ever allow excavation in that portion?
I think milling the road and repaving it is not really a threat to what might be there. It's if they cut the bank back. It's the road is set down actually, and if they would have ever cut the bank back, yeah, I think they would definitely. And I think if they were going to do that, they would be required to have some study done. So the state. Actually, one thing I should add is the entire Pleasant Valley core of Pleasant Valley is part of what's known as the Pleasant Valley Agricultural Historic District, which is listed in the National Register. And there's state law, it's in the state register as well, but under state law, there is something called the New Jersey Register of Historic Places Act, which anytime the county actually wants to do anything on their land, including roads, they would have to comply with that Register Act. So that would kick in archaeological review, as well as all kinds of building related stuff and even possibly landscape.
So does that mean the piece that overlaps with the road is probably gone?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Same with the gristmill. The gristmill building, it's lost its northern end here. So the road is narrow, but that's not unusual. They were narrow roads early on, and they've progressively been wide.
I have two questions.
Mhm.
So one is for you and then one is general. Phillips, they own the grist mill, correct? Or-
Right.
Were they intentionally brought to the town from Long Island to build a grist mill and create industry?
I think what was going on was the family moved to Maidenhead. It was a big family. The sons all split off and went and lived elsewhere. This particular son moved to Pleasant Valley. He was initially a farmer and a blacksmith, I believe. And the mill, I think, was probably like a secondary aim to create an economic sort of hub there at the road intersection. I mean, that road intersection is Pleasant Valley. I mean, the community of Pleasant Valley. So, and it's all taking shape in the 1730s, 1740s, 1750s. So it's a little different to the farm you have in that, there's an actual sort of intersection of stuff going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in both cases, you're talking about second or third generation.
Right.
Not from the first generation.
Right.
Right.
And my other question is, I guess for everybody in the audience, I've done a lot of research on Piscataway and Woodbridge, looking at the very initial settlements, so like 1670s, 1680s, doing research and trying to reconstruct the pattern of land imbalance for each parcel. And based on that, I have identified basically a position of New England style sediment, so like town greens, these longitudinal lots with like out parcels and the whole thing that goes along with town lots and then an accommodation upland with freeholders. But I didn't know if that was the same. in
If we're
sections.
outside of that.
You're outside.
Yeah.
So you're not,
Yeah.
Hopewell is not a township corporation.
The foster, maybe the parties are inside of it by province line, is where it stops.
Okay.
I mean, it's not so far away that there couldn't be some overlap there,
Uh-huh.
but those New England families that were in Piscataway, Middletown, and the Bridge, there are connections that come down mainly through Princeton to that side of Hopewell Township, but these are distinctly the Long Islanders that came down and spread out from Maidenhead toward the river.
I have a question for both the presenters, but I'm going to get into it. What capital health property? There are Merrill Lynch built and so forth. Was that ever any archaeological work done on that site?
I don't believe there was, no, and actually, Amy, that's something you could go ask at the commission. I don't think there was. Yeah, what triggers it is the DEP permitting. So if the developer needs to get, and they probably needed them for that particular project, it's an immense project. If they have to get wetlands permits to mess around with wetlands, then that will typically trigger historic preservation review, and that will be, archaeology would be part of that. But I don't, I mean, I've lived in the township a long time. I don't recall ever there being anything done for that particular project. But there was work done, architectural work done for the farms along Pennington Washington Crossing Road, right across from the township building, back around 2000 when that was all being developed. But you know what? If you give me your email address, I can check back and let you know.
Question for Michael. I had the unfortunate earlier this year, and I spent some time in the Valley area. You did a really nice job showing the history of the site, but I don't recall seeing anything about some of your work.
So we developed a poster that was supposed to hang in the lobby.
Okay.
I don't know how long they chose to hang in the lobby, but we did develop a public outreach poster that showcased the different archaeological aspects of the site.
Because it seems like both of you spend multi-year focus, and it would be a shame to lose that. We can do a program like this, but in terms of educating people that use it.
Yeah, so all I can say is we did develop one, and I don't know if it's, I live in South Jersey, so I don't frequent that hospital. But I don't know, it should still be somewhere in the hospital. It was supposed to be in the lobby. I
Perhaps
don't know.
it's there, I don't recall thinking that there was mention of a woman who gave son.
Closed? It's overrunning. Yeah, we overstayed our welcome. Yeah, all right. Well, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Everyone for attending today, and thank you, Michael, and thank you, Richard. They were both fascinating talks. And we still have refreshments in the back if anybody wants to help themselves. Thanks again.
Oh, yes.